Hello and welcome to Jason Live. My name is Patrick Shea. We're back once again with our STEM career series where we learn about careers in science, technology, engineering, and math from role models working in those fields. Today's STEM role model is Tristy Vick-Majors. Tristy is a microbial ecologist whose work takes her to incredible environments where we know very little, if anything, about the life that exists there. Her current research focuses on microbial life her team found in Lake Whillans, which lies 800 meters under the surface of the West Antarctica ice sheet. We're going to learn about all of that and more when we chat with Tristy in just a moment. But first, just want to remind everybody out there that today's event is live and interactive. Just below this video, you'll see a box where you can send in questions for Tristy and also participate in our polls later in the program. We're going to try to get as many of you involved today as we can. But right now, we want to get Tristy involved. Welcome, Tristy. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So we're going to start off talking about your current career and the current work that you do, your research. We actually have a question. Folks have been reading about you beforehand, and they're interested in the work that you've been doing in Antarctica. And our first couple of questions here, these are from Alexa and Rodolfo and Clayton, all had a related question about where did you know to look for the lake? Actually, those weren't exactly the questions that I was going to ask, but they're interested in the lake that you were studying. So why don't you tell us about that? How was it found, and why is that an interesting place to do work?
Sure. Um, yeah, those are great questions. Uh, we know now that there are over 400 of these subglacial lakes in Antarctica. Um, and really, the way that they were originally found was kind of by accident. So, the first subglacial lake to be discovered was Lake Vostok, which is a very, very large lake that was discovered by a Russian team. And the way that they found it was actually just by looking at satellite images of the ice surface of Antarctica and noticing that there was a big flat spot that looked like it had a lower elevation than the ice around it. Um, so, uh, so years later, people were able to go back and look for more of these flat spots and look at higher resolution satellite data. And they could see that some of these lakes drain and fill. The water moves under the ice sheet. And when they do this, it actually causes the surface of the ice itself to move. So you guys can see that in the video that's playing, where if you look at the water level, it's higher and then it goes up on the other side. And you can capture that with satellites.
So this is, I think, when people think of Antarctica, they think of the ice. They think of the surface. They don't really think about what's going on underneath there. So this is, I think, it's certainly really interesting for me, and I would think for our audience out there as well. What about it interests you? And I'm actually going to ask a question here from Saul as well. He's asking, why did you want to go there and explore the ice or explore under the ice? What's in it for you?
Yeah, that's a good question because it is really far away, and when we go there, we usually end up spending holidays like Christmas and Thanksgiving and New Year's in Antarctica instead of at home with our families. So we do have to have a really good reason to want to go there. Um, for me, it's really because it's a great place to be able to discover something new. So because it's not easy to get there, not a lot of people get to do it, and so there are a lot of new things that we can find. And because it's only been recently that we discovered these hundreds of lakes underneath the ice, they haven't been studied very well. And knowing that there are so many of them and that there's so much liquid water underneath the ice in Antarctica has really important implications for our understanding of the ecology of our planet.
So you mentioned ecology, and I introduced you at the beginning of the program as a microbial ecologist. Can you tell us what a microbial ecologist does. What are you interested in? What kind of questions do you ask about microbes and the environment in which they live?
Yeah, sure. So, an ecologist is basically someone who studies all of Earth's systems and how they interact with each other. So, that means studying life, so biology, but also studying things like chemistry and geology to figure out how our planet really works. Um, and so, a microbial ecologist is someone who thinks about those same things, but from the perspective of microbes. And microbes like bacteria, you might think of as things that make you sick, but they're actually really important in controlling processes on our planet. So when I think about microbial ecology, I think about answering questions like how does carbon move from the atmosphere into lakes or
Hmm.
into the ocean?
So, speaking of questions, we've got a couple more here. These two are from Bradley and Max. Bradley wants to know, what type of tools do you use? And Max asks, what kind of equipment was required for your expedition to Antarctica? And are those the same sets of tools?
Yeah, those are both really good questions. Um, so, working in Antarctica and doing this kind of research in particular requires kind of a wide array of tools. And, some of them are really simple. Like, I would consider my gloves and my boots to be tools that I need in order to do my work and in order to stay warm while I'm doing it and to be safe. Um, but it ranges from small things like that to science equipment, like pipettes and bottles, all the way up to uh, uh, vessels to collect our samples in. And the larger equipment that we use, like the drill that we use to make a hole in the ice, and the tractors that we use to get our equipment to the field site. So it's really a wide range of stuff.
Yeah, so this is probably a good time to just talk about how this whole project came together and what was involved. So we talked a little bit earlier about, there are these lakes and this one in particular that you were interested in. How would you go about learning what lives in that lake and finding the microbes? Walk me through this entire process of the expedition, and we're going to try to show some video that relates to that, so the kids can really see, how complicated an adventure like this is, just to answer some really important science questions.
Sure. Yeah. Um, so, I mean, from the time that we decided that we were going to go and do this, um, uh, it was really a more than 10-year planning process,
Wow.
which preceded my time working on the project. So there was a lot of pre-planning. And then once we got to the point that we could actually implement the project, we're starting out here in Montana in our lab. And we start out just by flying on a regular plane, which takes us first to Los Angeles and then down to New Zealand. Once we get to New Zealand, we stop off and we pick up all of our extreme cold weather gear, as we call it. And then we hop on a military plane, which takes us down to Antarctica. And the first place that we land in Antarctica is in McMurdo Station. It's a large research base. It's the largest one in Antarctica. There are about 1,000 people at McMurdo during the summer. Um, Once we get to McMurdo, we have to prepare all of our science equipment, so all of those sampling tools and bottles and filters, and we have to package it all up so that it can make the trip to our actual field site, which is actually another about 500 miles from McMurdo Station. So a lot of that stuff was actually pulled out to our field site by these large tractors. They call this a traverse. And this is a great way to move stuff around in Antarctica. Flying planes there is also great, but can also be difficult. And when you have a lot of big, heavy equipment, like what you're seeing in the video here, flying everything in a plane just doesn't really work very well, and it would be very, very expensive. So we had a team of 14 of these large tractors that pulled all of our labs. So some of these red containers that are going by are labs. Some of them are parts of the drill. Those bladders that you can see kind of moving on the ground, those hold fuel. So this team pulled everything out there. It took them 2 weeks. And once they arrived, they were able to set up the camp. And the rest of us, so the scientists and the rest of the people helping run the camp, were then able to fly in by airplane.
So you got to skip the 2-week, 7-mile-an-hour drive out and just met them there. And then you were there for how long?
How long were we in the field?
Yeah, how long were you at the camp at Lake Williams?
Yeah, so the science team was there for about 2 weeks. So we got out there and got our labs all set up, got our stuff ready to go, and then had a few days to do our sampling work before we then went back to McMurdo Station.
So now that you're out there, our next question from Deschanel gets at this, how do you get at the lake? She knows that you drilled a hole through 800 meters of ice. She wants to know, how long did it take to do that?
So once everything was set up and ready to go, so from the time that we actually got to fire up the drill to the time we got into the lake, that only took about a day. So the actual drilling itself is pretty fast. We drilled the hole with hot water, and so the water is really hot, it's at really high pressure, and so it actually melts the hole pretty quickly.
Our next question, related here, from Timothy. While making the hole in the ice, did you ever crack the ice and lose equipment?
That's a big concern, because it would be bad if we lost equipment down the hole. We luckily didn't have anything like that happen while we were there, and the people who design the drill and run the drill were a very, very talented group of engineers, and they're very experienced at drilling in ice. So they're pretty good at avoiding things like cracking it or losing integrity that could cause problems later.
We have actually 3 related questions here. Now that we have drilled the hole and gotten you guys access to the lake itself, Jordan, Richard, Alex, and Kara are all asking questions about what you found. So Jordan asks, what was it like working in Antarctica, and what did you find? Richard asks, were there microorganisms you discovered that were previously unknown? And Alex and Kara ask, what species of plant, animal, or bacteria did you find in the lake below the ice? So what have you discovered?
All right, so we went in with our hypothesis, which was that there would be life in this lake, and that it would probably be microbial, so it would be like bacteria.
So you weren't expecting to find fish down there,
water
for
samples
example.
up out of the lake. We took them and put them under the microscope and looked for bacterial cells, and that was exactly what we found. So we found bacteria, approximately the same number that you would find in some deeper places in the ocean. And some of the organisms are closely related to things that people have already seen, and some of them appear to not be closely related. and we don't necessarily know exactly what they are yet, but we do know that they're either bacteria or archaea.
So you found what you discovered matched your hypothesis, but was it still surprising at all? I mean, this is a lake that it gets no sunlight. It's, I would suspect, completely cut off kind of from the rest of the world. Is it surprising to find life in that kind of an environment? Or do we just find life everywhere, and would it be more surprising if you found nothing living down there?
Right. Um, yeah, I mean, it's interesting that so far, everywhere that anyone has looked, we have found some form of life. So I think not finding anything, it was certainly possible, but it would have been surprising. Um, what was also surprising was how much of the life we found. So I said that the numbers of bacteria were similar to some places in the ocean, um, and and some of us at least did not expect that much. We expected much less.
We've got another student question here. This one's from Jordan. He wants to know, what's the hardest part of your job?
Oh man, that's a tough one. So, I think probably the hardest part is being gone for so long when we do these trips. So, being in Antarctica for 3 months and missing Christmas and things like that with the family is hard. Um, the other part of it that's hard, but also what makes it interesting, I think, is going in to these environments and not knowing what we're going to find. So it's hard to try to figure out ahead of time what experiments we want to do when we don't know what we're going to see when we get there.
All right, we've got a related follow-up from Abby. She wants to know, what are the most dangerous situations in your job?
So anytime you're working in Antarctica, the most dangerous parts of the job are actually flying. So flying in Antarctica can be hazardous. It can be tricky for the pilots, and it's higher risk if something goes wrong. If your plane crashes, that maybe is worse than if your plane crashes somewhere else. So that's a hazard. For us on this project, the other biggest hazard was the borehole. So the hole that we made to go into the lake. You don't want to fall into something like that. And the hole itself was also surrounded by very, very strong ultraviolet lights. So that's like strong radiation coming in from the sun. And that was meant to kill microorganisms that might fall into the hole, but we had to wear special protective goggles to keep our eyes from being damaged by those lights.
So what would happen if you fell into the hole? I mean, we just go straight down 800 meters and splash in the lake?
Yeah, that would be pretty much it. I mean, unless if you're lucky and you're a little bigger than I am, maybe you wouldn't fall down the hole and they could pull you out. But yeah, the hole was big enough to, pretty much you just slide right down.
Yeah.
Big ice slide.
Well, I'm glad that didn't happen.
Me too.
Going back to your comments about the plane being pretty dangerous, we have a question from Justin. He's asking, when you land the plane on the ice, has the ice ever cracked?
That's a good question. So I don't know of a time when the ice has cracked. Can't think of one. But what does happen is sometimes the ice is a lot softer than we think it's going to be. And so the plane can actually land and then get stuck and not be able to take off again. And that actually happened at our field site. They had to dig the plane out of the snow and ice and use the jet-assisted rockets in order for the plane to take off.
Jet-assisted rockets.
There's probably a more technical term, but
Well, no, it just sounds like this trip gets more interesting by the minute as we learn all of these different things that you have to do to, travel around Antarctica and get work done. We're going to move on right now, though, however, and talk about your career path. Talk about what brought you to this point in your career where you're doing research in places like Antarctica. So we've got a question to kick us off here from Ajia, and she wants to know, why did you want to pursue this job?
Yeah, so I have to say, when I was young and in school, I didn't even know that jobs like this existed. So it's not really something that I always thought I was going to do when I grew up. Um, I actually wanted to be a writer. That was how I started out. But I was always interested in nature and in how the earth works, I guess. And so when I was in college, I started taking some microbiology classes and some ecology classes, and really liked them both. And I eventually figured out that I could put those two things together.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's what I did. I looked for graduate programs where I could go and work on a PhD studying microbes in the environment. I started out studying hot springs, and from there decided that, okay, I studied hot stuff, now maybe I want to study some cold stuff. And I ended up here.
We've got another question here about your past and your career path. This one's from Jenna. She wants to know, why did you want to be a cowgirl when you were younger? You mentioned wanting to be a writer, but you did not mention today, at least, that you wanted to be a cowgirl. But Jenna clearly read this in your role model profile online.
Yeah.
Is there a story there?
So I grew up in the country, and actually my dad, before I was born, was a rodeo cowboy, and he rode bucking horses. And so I was around that idea a lot, and I wanted to be a cowgirl and be a barrel racer.
It makes total sense. Our next question is from Leah. She wants to know, who was your inspiration when you were growing up?
Yeah, so I think my parents really both inspired me. So my dad has always worked closely with animals in various different ways, and I used to spend a lot of time sitting with him and watching nature programs on PBS. So that was kind of how I first got interested in nature, and then combining that with my mother, who really emphasized the importance of education and of doing something that you loved. And so that, yeah, I mean, that's really what inspired me to at least start on this path.
Great. Our next question is from Lori. She wants to know, what was your favorite book growing up?
Oh, that's a great question. I loved to read when I was growing up. I read a lot, and I had a lot of favorite books, but I would have to say when I was younger, I really loved Anne of Green Gables. I remember just thinking that she was so smart and so tough, and she just could do anything, and that was how I wanted to be. So,
Well, I have to say, my wife loves Anne of Green Gables as well, so the two of you would clearly be bosom friends. She has forced me to watch the movie over and over.
yep.
But we've got a few more questions here about your career path. This next one, actually, next two are related. Let's see, this is from Adriana and Kirsten. We're going to let those publish. There they are. If you didn't become an ecologist, what would your second choice of job be and why? And Kirsten wants to know if you could do anything except what you do right now, what would you do? And how long would you do it for?
All right. So, if I were going to have another job in science, I would study birds because I really like them. But if I were going to do something outside of science, I would want to be a writer. I always loved writing. And I mean, of course, I have to write as a scientist too, so I still get to do that. But that's what I would do. And how long would I do it for? I mean, hopefully I could do it forever.
There you go. Our next question here is from Alex. When choosing your major, was there ever a time you doubted your choice? And what did you do about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's something that a lot of people have probably been through. And the answer for me is certainly yes. As I said, I started out wanting to be a writer, and then I switched and I was going to major in psychology. And then I switched again and ended up majoring in biology. And I, yeah, I definitely had times of uncertainty even after I chose biology. Um, and I still do now. but kind of what it boils down to, I think, is if you can sit down and say, okay, is this interesting? Do I like this overall? And if the answer is yes, then you're onto something.
All right, and it sounds like the answer continues to be yes for you, at least for now. It sounds like
Yes.
you're doing very interesting stuff. It's time for us to move along in the program. We've asked you a lot of questions up until this point, and now it is time for you to ask our audience some questions. We're going to do our poll questions next. And our first poll question that Tristy came up for us: what percentage of Antarctica is not covered with ice? Is it A, 0%? Is it B, 0.3%? Is it C, 12.1%? Or is it D, 100%? So if you're guessing A, you think that 0% of Antarctica is not covered in ice. Am I reading this right, Tristy?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. And if you think D, you think 100% is not covered with ice. And then a couple answers in between. So we're going to give our audience just a little bit of time here to pick one of those answers. I'm able to see the results coming in, Tristy, so I can tell you right now, B is well in the lead. Folks out there are guessing
Interesting.
0.3% right now. I'm not sure how they're coming at that answer. I don't know if they're racing online and looking at maps of Antarctica, trying to figure out what percentage does not have any ice on it. We've got a few more votes coming in here. There are some people now guessing 12.1%, but B is still in the lead with 75% of the vote. So why don't you tell us the right answer here?
Wow, you guys are good. The right answer is B. 0.3% of Antarctica is not covered with ice.
All right. So we're going to move on to our next poll question then. What is the coldest temperature that Tristy camped at while doing research? Is it A, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, B, 0 degrees Fahrenheit, C, negative 31 degrees Fahrenheit, and D, negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit? So Tristy, when we're thinking about these temperature values, is this with wind chill or just straight up regular temperature?
Just straight regular temperature.
So this would be like the temperature in your tent?
Usually the tent is warmer.
Okay.
That's one of the fortunate things about having so much sunlight in Antarctica. It warms up the tent.
Okay, and we're also, when you're down there doing research, I'm assuming you're going in the Antarctic summer. Is that right? So we're talking still potentially not warm, but warmer than it would be if you were down there in the winter.
Yeah, yeah. So typically we go in the summer. Um, I have been there once during the fall, um, but yeah, usually it's the Antarctic summer.
Okay, so let's see what our audience is guessing here. Negative 31 degrees. Answer letter C here has so far gotten 100% of the vote. Everybody thinks it was negative 31 degrees, and I don't know why. I don't know why we haven't got a couple people to vote on any of those other
Wow.
options, but they think it's negative 31. Is that correct?
That is correct. Man, it's like you guys are reading my mind.
That is amazing.
Um,
I didn't even get that one right
yeah,
when we were
negative
talking about it.
31. That was my first trip to Antarctica, which was during the fall. So it actually was dark at night, and it got pretty cold.
Okay, and what does negative 31 feel like for those of our viewers who might be in the, southern part of the country and they don't get to experience that kind of extreme weather?
Sure. Well, what does it feel like? I mean, I can tell you when you first step off of the airplane, where it's nice and warm and it's negative 30 degrees or so, it uh, it knocks the wind out of you. Is the best way to describe it. Um, everything in your nose freezes, and it's kind of hard to breathe.
Okay. We are going to go to our third poll question. And I think because of a little weird technical thing here, I might not be able to have our audience vote on it, but we're going to talk about it here anyway. The question is, why is Antarctica worth studying? Is it because A, it's fun to go there? Is it B, it contains 60% of the world's fresh water? Do you think the answer is C, it is the continent least impacted by humans? Is it D, it is a good place to study how life might exist on other planets? Or is it E, all of the above? So we're going to give our audience a second here to think about this. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to let them guess because one of these answers has too many characters for it to work in our poll platform. Anyway, think about this. Why is Antarctica worth studying? And the other thing to think about here is, have we ever had a poll question where all of the above was an option, where all of the above was not the correct answer? I think we have, but I'm not sure if we do today. So, Tristy, why don't you tell us what the right answer is?
Well, yes, of course, the answer is E, all of the above. It is a fun place to go, and it does contain most of the planet's fresh water, and it's a great place to study a lot of things.
That really is an amazing stat to think about. 60% of the world's fresh water. It's obviously pretty locked up in the ice down there. But the world's fresh water, I don't know if you know this stat off the top of your head. I'm sure I will not get it exactly right, but it's something like less than 1% of all of the water on Earth is actually fresh water. And then 60% of that is into Antarctica and really not accessible. It's pretty amazing to think that. We're going to move on now to our last poll question before we continue with the program. And this one, I happen to really like this one. What animal did Tristy and her dad transport from Colorado to Missouri in a horse trailer when Tristy was growing up? Was it A, a horse? That seems to make sense as something that would go in a horse trailer. Is that the correct answer? Is it B, a milk cow? Is it C, a hippopotamus? Or is it D, a giraffe? What do you think the right answer is? And I'm going to publish that one so that you guys can all vote on it. I don't know. Would a giraffe fit in your typical horse trailer? I don't want to give away the answer
It's a
here,
good
but
question.
I'm wondering if we can rule out one of these. Are we talking about a native Coloradan hippopotamus? This, Is it actually just the obvious answer of horse? This is a really tricky one. This is the last poll question of the school year in our live event program, and we are trying to stump you. And we've got votes coming in. So far, 75% think it's a horse. And that seems to make sense. 25% are guessing cow. And you've been really specific here about that this is a milk cow in this option. Right? Are there other kinds of cows?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it shows you what I know about cows.
Yeah, lots of different kinds of cows.
And it seems like that's what people are voting on. They think it's A. 75% of our audience out there today think it's A, horse. Is that the right answer?
Well, the right answer, in fact, is C, a hippopotamus.
So you and your dad got in a car and pulled behind you a hippopotamus and a horse trailer. Why did this happen?
So, all right. So, I mean, this was a little bit of a tricky question. So,
It was a very tricky question.
you guys shouldn't feel too bad about guessing the answer that made sense. But so my dad, in addition to being a rodeo cowboy before I was born, is actually also a taxidermist, and he was enlisted to take a life-size hippopotamus and make it look all nice and pretty, and take it to Missouri to the Bass Pro Shops to put on display. And what we had to transport it in was a horse trailer, so that's what we did.
It sounds like fun. And then you can always, for the rest of your life, you can say that you did this. And, I mean, how many people can say they've transported a hippopotamus and a horse trailer? I certainly can't, and I probably never will. We're going to move on now. We want to talk about the future of your career. So I understand right now you're working towards your PhD. Can you talk about goals that you have for the future, kinds of research that you want to do, something that you want to discover? What do you have coming up in the future of your career?
Yeah, sure. So hopefully I will be finishing my PhD just about a year from now. And what I would really like to do when I'm done is to keep working at universities. I would like to be a professor and run a research lab as well as teach. And I would like to focus my research on the Antarctic, but also on the ocean. So I think microbial ecology in the oceans is very, very important. It's a very important part of our planet, and so that's what I would like to keep studying.
And also thinking about the future, do you have advice for students that are watching today? Maybe some of them want to follow in your footsteps and be a microbial ecologist and do research in Antarctica. What should they be thinking about now for kids that are in middle school today or possibly in high school? What should they be doing? What should they be studying? What kinds of experiences should they be getting in order to have this be an option for them in the future?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing that you can do is to keep working hard in school. Keep paying attention in your science classes, certainly, and in your math classes, certainly. But it's not just about being good at those things. I especially had kind of a hard time with math when I was younger. And I was a lot better at writing, but I've learned to use those skills to do what I want to do. So my advice would be, just to keep doing things that you like, but also to study hard at the things that you're not sure if you like. Because you never know when down the road you're going to decide that you actually want to do those things.
Very good advice there. We're going to, we've got time for just a couple more questions from our live audience. This next one's from Paco. Let me make sure we scroll down and I can actually see it. There it is. Have you ever imagined swimming into Antarctica?
That is a great question. And I actually have
You've
imagined.
imagined
I
it,
haven't
or
done
you
it,
have you've
but
done it?
I thought about it. Every year, they put on an event called the Polar Plunge, which they break a hole through the sea ice at a research station near McMurdo, and people jump into the ocean. And they don't stay in very long because it's really cold. But yes, if I were ever able to participate in that, I probably would. I would probably only do it once.
But people do scuba down there, true, to see what's
Yes.
going on underneath the ice shelf.
Hmm.
So it's not
Yeah,
a totally
absolutely.
crazy thing.
Yeah, people
But it-
dive under the ice, and there's some great video work that's been done under the ice. That's not a skill that I have, but people certainly do it.
There you go. All right, our last question, I believe, of the event. This is from Taha. She's interested in the microorganisms that you found and wants to know, were they multicellular or unicellular?
Yeah, so everything that we found was unicellular. I would expect that what we found is representative of at least most of what is there. But that doesn't mean that there couldn't be some small multicellular life as well. We wouldn't expect to find anything like fish or anything big, but there could be.
All right. Well, if we had found fish, would that just completely blow your mind, and would we have to completely rethink of how these communities work?
Yes, if there were fish in the subglacial lakes, my mind would be blown,
All right.
and I would probably be really famous right now.
Well, fingers crossed. We hope you find something, if not exactly fish, but something equally amazing in the future. And if not, we continue to wish you luck. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really interesting learning about your work and your career path. We've really enjoyed having you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great.
All right. So as we wrap this event up, I just want to remind everybody out there that today was the last live role model event of the school year. We're going to take a break for the summer, but be sure to tune in again when we return with an all-new lineup of STEM role models in September. You can keep an eye on our website. If you go to jason.org/live, we'll be posting the schedule for our fall role model events pretty soon. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook to get all of our upcoming event announcements. That is all the time we have for today. Once again, thanks for joining us. My name is Patrick Shea for Jason Live. We'll see you next time. Take care.